you're the CEO of your life. What are you going to do with it? No one's going to care more about your career and your life than you are. And so if you are the CEO of your life, act like it. And one of the things that you have to do is think through, take blocks of time to think through where you want to be long range, and then work your way back to create a game plan on where you want to be.
Welcome to the Choir Baton, a podcast designed to engage with people in stories, ideas, and inspirations stemming from choir. No other art form, no sport, no hobby, no business requires a group of people to execute a communal goal with just their voices. Join me, your host, Beth Philemon, as I interview guests who are singers, teacher conductors, instrumentalists, and community members. Together, we'll ask questions, seek understanding, and share insight from our experiences in life and in choir. Choir Baton, I am elated to have one of my professors with me today. Welcome, Dr. Hitch, to the Choir Baton podcast.
I'm thrilled to be able to be here, Beth. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So a little bit of background. Dr. Hitch has been incredibly influential in my career as an MBA student, but you might not know also through Choir Baton. In addition to things that I've learned from his class, he has also supported and encouraged Choir Baton. And this past summer, I got to work with him and some of his students, MBA students, at one of the universities that he teaches at, and kind of a consulting strategy project too, which was awesome. So thank you for thinking of me and for Choir Baton through that, Dr. Hitch. I appreciate it.
Glad to do it. And let's be clear, my name's Chris.
Well, I was going to transition to that, absolutely, but keeping it formal for the first couple minutes. So many of you that are listening know my story. You know that I was a high school teacher for 10 years and have transitioned to getting my MBA. And there are some people that get that transition, that get being a classroom teacher is like running your own kind of business. And then there are some people that, despite being even professors, don't understand that, and to each their own. But when I was reading about Dr. Hitch, I first felt connected to him because you were a principal.
That's correct.
So tell us a little bit about, where were you a principal, Dr. Hitch, or Chris?
Chris, there we go. So I served as a principal at 2 schools in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Schools. I served as a principal of Latham Elementary, which is now Latham Diggs Elementary. And I also served as a principal at Spies Elementary. Moved and served as the Director of Human Resources for Lexington City Schools, and then returned to Cary, North Carolina, where we've grown up and where our kids have grown up, and served as a principal there too, and then pivoted to do some other things.
Absolutely. So would you mind sharing with us what are some of the things, right? There's a lot of different things that you are doing. Would you mind sharing with us about those as well?
So, one of the things that I think is important for everybody to understand is that you control your own destiny. And the things that you do now are not necessarily going to be the things that you have to do later on. There are some people who make a career in one particular area or one particular industry. I've loved and I've worked with loads of teachers like that. And that's not the only path. There are lots of other paths that you can take. And the skills that you have and the skills that you honed as a teacher are transferable skills. You essentially, as a teacher, you're an executive. You may not think of yourself as an executive, but you're an executive. Because if I look at what it is that you do as a teacher, plan and create an annual and then a monthly and a unit set of lessons and lesson planning, that's strategy. What are you going to do when? If I talk about how you go about persuading and encouraging and cajoling students who may not want to do what you want them to do to help them learn, that's a skill that's used over and over again in other fields. It's called influence without authority. How do you get people to follow you and to do what you need them to do to meet the overall organizational goals. In your case, the organization is a school. There are loads of transferable skills. And oh, by the way, you've got those skills in spades. You've got a wide open set of options for you, both inside and outside of public education. I don't want to say you need to get out of public education. What I do want to say is you have lots of paths available for you that you can pursue either while you're teaching as a side hustle or to make a career pivot that I work with a lot of people in my world now who are pivoting from one role to another.
Why do you think it is that people are so afraid to consider the fact that their skills are transferable?
I think it's because when you go to college, whatever it is, and you go into your major, you think that because you're trained in that major, that that's the only thing that you can do. That's a set of technical skills. I'll argue very forcefully that you can learn new technical skills. Undergraduate, a baccalaureate degree helps you learn how to learn. And if you're able to learn how to learn, you can take that expertise and that skill and that intellectual muscle, if you will, and you can try it with different things. And it works.
Right. Well, I love that you talked about, teachers as being incredibly strategic, because from your time in the classroom, sometimes that feels like the last thing that you are is strategic, right? When things are every which way, and things that were never covered in any type of ed class are suddenly, plaguing not just your day, but every period. How do you help people see beyond that?
So, number one, I'm not going to tell you I have all the answers. What I've been very fortunate as is I've had the chance to learn from and work with loads of different people from all walks of life. I have had a multitude of Forrest Gump moments in my career. It's just absolutely amazing. And for those of y'all that are not old enough to remember the movie Forrest Gump, yes, you need to go watch the movie Forrest Gump, and then you'll understand what I'm saying. But one of the things that I've learned over and over again is you've got to take time for yourself. You've got to block out time sometime where you're able to get down from underneath and in the weeds, to get up on a balcony, figuratively or literally, to start thinking about what is it that you want to do a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. And I'll offer that you start working backwards. Where do you want to be 3 years from now? And then hit yourself a halfway mark. Where do you want to be at 18 months? And then where do you want to be at 9 months? And then you work it that way until you get down to what do you want to do every 3 months? And you kind of keep your focus on it. And again, from where I sit, listening, working with, and trying and practicing these skills, I've learned that if you don't have more than 4 priorities, if you've got more than 4 priorities, you really don't have priorities. And there's several exercises you can do, but when I do this with executives, when I do this with leaders, when I did this with school principals, over and over again, we work through what are your priorities, and then what are you spending time on, and do those two match up?
That's huge. And I think that's where, when you're in the classroom, if you're not careful, that strategy can begin to feel misaligned.
And I wouldn't even, strategy sounds really cool and awesome. It's really just, you're the CEO of your life. What are you going to do with it? No one's going to care more about your career and your life than you are. And so if you are the CEO of your life, act like it. And one of the things that you have to do is think through, take blocks of time to think through where you want to be long range, and then work your way back to create a game plan on where you want to be.
So I love that mentality, and you know, that's kind of been what's led for me to have so much kind of transformative growth. But I think there's a lot of people, and I would argue to say perhaps maybe a lot in the educational field, that don't understand what it means to be a CEO, right? That seems like something you see on a Lifetime movie, or the big bad guys you see on, you know, that make all the money. What does being a CEO really entail?
Yeah, so let me dispel the myth, because many teachers and many educators have this innate fear, loathing, or what of being able to make money. And I'll argue that your worth is so much more than what you're being paid. Teachers are absolutely 100% underpaid, because you, unlike a business, you bring in and you take and you nurture and grow anybody who comes in the door. You do not get the luxury of saying, yeah, you're not the kind of, that's not the kind of population that I want to work with, or you're the, every parent does the absolute best they can with what they've got. They don't hold back bringing their children to school. And I can say this serving as a principal of 3 Title I schools. So everybody brings the best. Your job is to take them as where they are and take them as far as you can go. What I'll argue as being the CEO is you've got to think of yourself in several different facets. Number one, what are your goals? That's the first thing that people think about. The second thing that people think about, what really jazzes you up? What's your mission? What are your values? And from where I sit, I'll use this acronym that I wish I could say I learned it on my own, but I learned it from reading some really, really smart, wrinkled brain people and talking with them. But they talk about data, but not data like you and I deal with data. Data is an acronym for dreams, aspirations, your temperament, and your abilities, or your assets, excuse me. And so if you look at your data, what are your dreams? Dreams and priorities. Where do you want to be? What do you aspire to? It could be to be the very best band director you can be. Boom. That's your dream. That's your aspiration. It could be that you want to do something else in addition to being a teacher. It could be that you're using teaching as a vehicle to pay the bills so that you can be the very best parent that you can be. All of those are absolutely invaluable. But be clear on what it is that you want. That's an executive skill, okay? Number two, then once you figured out what your dreams and aspirations are, you got to think through what's your game plan, because strategy is just a really big fancy business term that focuses on where are you going to focus your time and effort and talents. Number two, what makes you great at what it is that you do? Number three, what are some capabilities that you have that work well in one area that may work well in another area? Number four, where are you going to get the biggest bang for your buck? And the biggest bang for your buck focuses on time, treasure, and your talents. And then finally, what's the timing and sequence of the things that you're going to do as long as your game plan? Now, what I've just shared with you, and Beth, you've taken my course. You understand where I'm going with this. Those are the 5 big questions of strategy that every CEO, no matter whether they're in a nonprofit, a for-profit, a Fortune 500, a solopreneur, a state agency, a classroom teacher, you're focusing on those 5 key questions all the time.
I think it's so important for especially classroom teachers, musicians, et cetera, to remember that so much of those 5 questions is involved in sense of self. And, you know, this term imposter syndrome has been popularized recently, but I do think it truly holds true. And you have worked with the gamut of people in all different kinds of walks of life, and large companies, small companies, et cetera. Do you see that imposter syndrome?
Oh yeah, I'm part of it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Same, of course.
Okay.
Sure.
Absolutely. Example number one. First principalship at age 30. All right. Incredibly young. Earned my terminal degree, earned my PhD in 1990. And within 2 months after that, I was a school principal. I made so many mistakes. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I would make one mistake after another. And I thought, I'm no good at this. I can't do this. The good news is that as long as you think you're moving in the right direction, B, you're making decisions for the right reasons, C, you're reflecting and saying, okay, I'll make a different mistake next time. I won't make the same one. All right. You grow in confidence and you grow in skill. Example number two. After serving as an assistant director for the principal's executive program across the state, I was asked to go to work at the business school to work and lead workshops for people within the military around the country and around the world. I told them, you've got the wrong person. I've never served in the military. I have the utmost respect for those men and women who have taken on the cloth and stepped forward and sacrificed in their bravery. I've got a lot of friends that are in the military, but I never served. What makes you think that I can do that? And then they say, yeah, but at least you've got public sector experience. None of us have public sector experience. Scratched my head a little, took a risk, all right? Then I come to find out that the people that they're working with are the people that are flag and general officers, 1, 2, and 3, and 4-star admirals. And I'm doing this around the world and around the country with people. I can't do this. I don't have any credibility. But as long as you keep your focus on asking good questions, trying to figure out, and then as I do the things that I was doing around the country and around the world, then you start to get experience, you start to get a little bit more comfortable, and you start to get a chance to say, yep, I might be able to do this at a superficial level. And then I can do a little bit better with this as I go a little bit deeper. And you grow in your capability, you grow in your skill, and you're doing that. Example 3, I pivoted from a public education sector to working in a management and training company, a technology training company based in the RTP, where I was then all of a sudden tasked with learning a new technology and being the person that was the product director for 150 instructors, all of whom had more skill and experience in those technical areas than I ever did. I'm not a technical guy. Oh, sugar, what am I going to do? There were some other words that I used, but I'll use oh, sugar, okay? What am I going to do? And you go in there with humility and say, I don't know what I don't know. You need to help me. Here are some things that I can do to help move our organization forward. And it seems to work. So you're never going to be fully prepared for everything that comes up. And what I've seen and I've read about over and over again is that there is a group of people that are willing to take that risk for a new job or a new opportunity, knowing that they don't have all the skills. And then there are others that wait to think, I can't apply for this job until I have all the skills. Put yourself in that first camp. You don't have to know everything. Right. Because as a hiring manager and a hiring executive, if I look at somebody and they've got half the technical skills, but they've got the will and the want to, I'll hire for the will and the want to, because I know they'll grow those technical skills.
Well, and I think that's so indicative of so many teachers, is that will and the want to, that passion and willingness to go as far as it takes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Well, got it.
Yes.
Have it.
Yeah. Well, and along with that, in talking about leadership and how we seek to be the CEO of our own life and lean into continuing to learn and admit when we don't know. Particularly right now in the world we're living in, teachers are put in very precarious situations where they more than ever might not agree with administrative decisions, might not agree with the decisions even of teachers around them. I mean, if ever there was to be a more tumultuous time, or most tumultuous time, this is kind of it. But oftentimes as educators, we are not taught how to disagree, right? Or how to share our concerns, how to speak up for ourselves, but to do so respectfully, right? Most people seek to do it respectfully, but I would love your insight for listeners to understand how they can have that ownership while still being within the school setting.
Yeah. So two of the best people that taught me how to do this. I won't use last names. One of them's name is Daryl. The other's name is Gene. And both of these individuals taught me to use these I messages over and over again. And to simply say phrases like, here's how I see it, or here's my perspective on this. I want to share it with you. What's your perspective? So that you try to learn what goes on. Every person in a leadership position has pressures, has pinch points, has worries, has things that they've got to do, and they've got to do them whether they want to or not, because it's part of the organization. And every time that you do that, you're faced with that crucible, which is this worth it for me to go to the mat for and fight for my professional career on? And there are very few of those, all right? As long as it's, from where I sit, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or unethical, you're honor bound to follow what goes on. And you're expected to put your point of view up there. The very best executives, whether it's public school or somewhere else, want to know what people have to say. That's that whole idea with teacher engagement or employee engagement that you're seeing all around the country. They want to hear what goes on. And so when you go in and you share, this is my concern and this is how I see it, no one can argue with how you see it. That's your perspective, okay? Now, you notice I didn't say, you've got to do this, this, and this. Somebody pointing their finger in my belly button is not a way to get me to change, all right? But you have to have that adult dialogue where the other person is 3 times 7, they're an adult, you're 3 times 7, you're an adult. How do you have those adult conversations? And you use I messages. Here is what I see, and this is where I see it, and this is why I'm concerned. Help me figure out a way forward here. I'd offer that.
I think that's incredibly important and something we too often lose sight of as educators, because we are in control, if you will, of our classroom, our domain, and it's too easy for us to go to an administrator or to not see beyond our bubble.
Yeah, and that's the blessing and the curse of working in an organization, is that you work in an organization. And while you have a great deal of autonomy within your particular area in terms of what and how and when, you still have guidelines that you have to meet. And the only way to avoid that is to work for yourself. And once you decide to work for yourself as a solopreneur, that opens up a whole different host of issues and challenges that are going on that become new pinch points. So the grass isn't always greener on the other side. If you're going to work within an organization, you work within the organization. And it's candidly, it's a paradox, because you can tell by my accent that I've got a very weird hybrid accent. Grew up in the South, grew up in Texas, moved to North Carolina in been here 35 plus years, okay? And so when I say folks, I mean men and women together. When we talk about fixing to, that's what you do before you actually do something. And the Southern curse is if you say bless your heart, you've just been cursed in the Southern tradition, because what that's code for is, for all of y'all outside of the South, is when a Southerner says bless your heart, they're basically saying bless your heart, you're doing the best you can with what you got. It ain't much, but you're doing the very best you can with what you got, okay? So within the organization, you've got to recognize that everybody has those pinch points. And you've got to find ways where you can help them and you both achieve what it is that you want to achieve. And it's a skill, and skills can be learned, and skills take practice.
So this is one of the biggest skills that I learned first from your class, and I still use every day.
Lord have mercy. Okay. That for which I'm about to receive, let me be truly grateful.
And people that are listening to this will probably have a chuckle if they have listened to previous podcasts or had conversations with me in person, because that skill is being succinct.
I plead guilty.
Yes, it is so important. And I wish that I had you, 15 years ago when I started in school, much less before I started emails to bosses. But would you, it's so simple, it makes total sense, but would you share a little bit about the how and why of the power of being succinct?
Yeah. So number one, whenever you're writing something, you've got to remember who your audience is. Right? And so is your audience your boss? Is your audience a group of parents? Is your audience someone else? So you have to think through who your audience is and what they know. That tailors what it is that you're going to write. Number two, you have to be clear about what your intent is. Are you trying to educate? Are you trying to inform? Or are you trying to persuade? Third, and most importantly, once you've got your audience and intent, then you want to craft your message where it's the headline of that message is in one sentence. What's your headline? All right. Is it action? Is it information? Is it persuasion? What is it? And so the acronym AIM, audience, intent, and message, really works well. Now, specifically when you're looking at an email, if you want somebody to react to something, put what you want them to do in the first paragraph, preferably in the first sentence. Here's why. Managers and executives have between 150 to 200 emails every day. The vast majority of them, they've got about 15 seconds to take a look at it before they go. If you're burying your lead way far down in the fourth or fifth paragraph, it's not going to get any attention. So you've got to be succinct, be clear, put it in one sentence. And with mobile devices being used all the time, that's even more important. Because a manager's job is based upon brevity, variety, and fragmentation. And you as a teacher, principals, assistant principals, everybody makes between 400 to 500 decisions every day. Some of them are small and mundane. Some are no kidding big decisions that they've got to focus on. So the quicker you get to the point, the better off you are.
I will craft emails to my boss at my current internship, and I kid you not, have what would Chris say? What would my word count be? But because listen, and also the power of recommendations. I mean, he's a tough grader. My first assignment was not good, and I was like, I am determined. I'm going to fix this. I redid it even, and just for me, because I was so anal, I wanted to redo it to see if I could make it fit and make it work. But one of the things that I was being so anal about was making sure that my words were more succinct, because that was something that I also valued about your grading, as you took the time to grade it as well. And that always is so huge as a student, when you know the teacher puts the time into it to, really make sure that it is the ultimate best. So thank you. I don't know if I ever told you that, but I really appreciated it.
Well, thank you. So, truth in advertising. Remember, I was a teacher too. Our daughter is a teacher. My wife was a teacher. So conversations around the dinner table tended to surround teaching. And my point of view is, because the assignments that I give students, it takes time to do it, all right? Because it's not check the box, fill in the blank kind of stuff. I'm making y'all actually do it. And it's taking y'all 10 to 15 to 20 hours to be able to do something like that. If you're going to spend that time creating something, I owe it to you to give you feedback, feed forward, however you want to phrase, in terms of specificity. More of this, less of that, and here's why.
Right. That feedback loop is so huge. And seeing it also in a written form as well for feedback, I think is really important for choir and music teachers in general to understand. So oftentimes we give verbal feedback, but there is importance in written feedback as well.
So Beth, I want to go back to something that you and I talked about earlier in this podcast, in terms of how do you respectfully share your concerns. And I didn't hit it earlier, and I want to hit it now. Your ability to influence others is built a great deal upon your credibility and how well people trust you. And that's something that people often underestimate, but it's incredibly important. And so you're at NC State. I teach at NC State. NC State has a bunch of engineers, and people in engineering and the technical fields love formulas and equations. So I want to share with you an equation that I have learned in terms of how to build that credibility and trust. And if you think of credibility and trust, it's dealing with these 5 factors. 1, technical skills. So if you're writing this down, is TS, technical skills, plus, open your parentheses, H for honesty, you always tell the truth, I for integrity, which means that your words and your actions line up with each other, times E for empathy, or you can use compassion if you want to use it, that phrase, multiplied by humility. And so if you place each of those on a 1 to 5 scale or a 1 to 10 scale, whatever it is, but the highest is the higher number, a couple of things pop out. One is that technical skills, you have to have them, but at some point they assume that you can do the work that you're asked to do. So if you're going to hide behind your technical skills or your degree or your major or the fact that you've got an additional certification, that really doesn't matter as much as you think it does. It opens doors for you, but in terms of credibility, it's additive. It's what goes on within those parentheses: honesty times integrity times compassion or empathy times humble humility. Those are the things that mean a great deal. I learned this from General Hugh Shelton, who I had the honor of working for 3 years when I served as the director of the Shelton Leadership Center at NC State. And he talked about this idea of values-based leadership. He used a different equation, but the idea that these professional skills, these intangible skills, those are the things that mean the most. And the more that you have those and the more that you grow and exercise honesty, integrity, humility, compassion, or empathy, however you phrase that, the more people are going to pay attention to you. And conversely, if you don't have that, no one cares if you've got a terminal degree. If they can't trust you, you're not going to be listened to.
Right. I think particularly as musicians, that have gone through 4 years of intensive training to not only be excellent in their abilities to play the piano, sing, play their instrument, etc. And then especially adding on an ed degree on top of that, it is easy to lose sight of the other variables.
Yeah. And, scar tissue, I talked about my first principalship. There is nobody more arrogant than a newly minted PhD. Absolutely not. Okay. And when you've earned your PhD at a relatively young age, you think you're the king of the world until you actually have to do something. And then you get kicked in the mouth because you led with, look at me, I'm Dr. Hitch. No, I'm Chris. Okay. Arrogance, never a good lead.
Right. Yeah. I think we certainly see that again in the musicianship field, and particularly in choral music. There's that push, that desire to go and to get the additional degrees, especially a terminal degree such as a doctorate. I'm curious, you have coached many people about career transitions, I have no doubt, when to take one, when to not. And I know this because I speak with choir teachers in general, almost every day, that are questioning whether or not they should leave education. And you mentioned it earlier, right? This is not designed to push everyone out of public education. We want good, right? Absolutely. But for some, it is an okay transition. There is no shame in leaving. Both you and I have left. What are ways in which people need to further examine, is this a down part in my career and it'll come back up? When should I begin to, when and what should I begin to think through with that?
Yeah. I think the first thing to think about is the fact of realistic expectations. Your career is not going to be a human highlight reel. We want this instant gratification, but you want this supposedly overnight success, but over and over again, that overnight success happens from long periods of hard toil. I can't remember what it was, Malcolm Gladwell, or I think it was Malcolm Gladwell that wrote the idea that it takes 10,000 hours of practice before you're truly proficient at something. I don't know whether it was Gladwell or somebody else, but the idea that it takes a lot of hard work inevitably means that you're going to have some bumps and bruises. The second thing, and I'm going to get to your point in a moment, but the second thing is, anytime that you try something new, it's hard. And it's whenever you take a new job, or whether you're trying to do something new, it's hard because you're having to go back as a beginner once again, and it ticks you off because you were really good at it before you started this, and now you've got this whole new set of skills, and then that spirals down into this imposter syndrome, and it's just a deep, dark place. Okay. So you got to give yourself permission and a little bit of grace. All right. That you don't have to be right and you don't have to be perfect every single time. For me, the criteria that I tend to use and that I've watched and listened to other people, they will stay A, as long as they're learning something, and or B, as long as they're able to make a difference. If those two things aren't present on a consistent basis, then it's time for you to get up on that balcony and look at your data. What are your dreams, your aspirations, your temperament, and your assets? Okay. But you've got all these different variables. I wrote this down somewhere where I've got to make sure that I've got this right. Yeah. There's a paradox in today's work life. It's easier to see it outside of public education, but now you're seeing it inside public education as well, where there are lots of different opportunities, whether it's schools, whether it's types of schools, whether it's public versus private versus charter versus virtual, all these different types of schools. On one hand, whatever you do, you have to ride for the brand. Once you're taking money for the organization, you've got to say, I'm going to do the very best that I can. And at the same time, you have to remember that you're a part of the free agent nation. Every once in a while, you've got to decide you're going to pick up your tools right up in here, go somewhere else. So from where I sit, and going somewhere else could be a different place within a district. It could be a different type of role. But first, you've got to go back to yourself in terms of getting on the balcony. What are your dreams and aspirations? And then figure out what's the path that's going to help you there. And recognize that if you're people teach for lots of different reasons, and be clear about why it is that you're teaching. The vast majority of us say we do it for the kids that we have. And then when we become parents, it becomes something a little bit different because our primary role is for our children, our own children. And those things change and they ebb and they flow and they rise and they fall. Just take a moment. I will argue once a week. Take a little bit of time to think back. What is it that's important to me? What are my priorities? Am I moving forward with my priorities?
Right. Yeah, I love that. I think that, again, that writing it down, that data, I love that acronym, to, again, reassess where you're at, because it's so easy to lose sight of that.
Yeah, and there's another part that ties in with it. Now, I'll talk about the business school, and then I'll talk about how it happens in other phases as well. In the business school, they'll talk about differentiators and your competitive advantage. It's basically the answer to those 4 questions that you had to go through. Valuable, rare, inimitable, which is the word that you use to make sure that you're in good health. Non-substitutable, and sustainable. So if you think through what makes you so good, and it's everybody is unique, everybody has a different set of skills, abilities, capabilities, both technical and professional. What makes you so good? And then translate that into how that helps you help other people. Once you've got that clear in your mind, you can see that there are lots of different ways that you can apply that skill, right? Now, what you didn't get in my class, but some of my other students do, I love this book.
Springboard
by Richard Shell, all right?
Okay.
Now, I have this on my reading list. It is absolutely phenomenal because it helps you think through what it is that's most important for you. And Dr. Shell is a negotiations professor at Wharton, but this is not any type of negotiation book in any way, shape, or form. It focuses on why do you do what you do? I'll just give a quick overview of the number 1, what is success? So you got to choose what success is for you. Talking about choosing the life that you want to lead. Do you want to be happy? Do you want to seek status, fame, fortune, and finding meaningful work? So his first question, he talks about what is success for you? What's the role of parents in your community have on this? What's important to you? And then the second question is, how will I achieve it? Discover what you can do better than most. Learn to fail. You're not going to be perfect the first time. Focus your mind. Summon your energies. Develop credibility. It's a phenomenal book. I can't say enough of it. And figure out ways to get the book. You don't have to own it. Libraries could have it, interlibrary loan. Those are some options. This other book is a short book, and I fell in love with this guy back when I was first working on my PhD back in 1986, when he and Bob Waterman wrote In Search of Excellence. But Tom Peters is a phenomenal guy. And when he talks about the brand you, 50, he talks about 50 different ways to start thinking of yourself as brand you. Now, full disclosure, I've never met Tom Peters. I'm not affiliated in any way, shape, or form with either Tom Peters or Richard Shell. I have had a couple of emails with Richard where I asked him to share his syllabus with me because I was using it for one of my classes that I was teaching. He was very generous about doing that. but I don't get any financial remuneration in any way, shape, or form from any of these guys. They're just on my bookshelf. I've got a bookshelf of about 75 books over there that are my go-to books right now, and they're on them.
Yeah. I love that. I think particularly for teachers, that sense of personal brand is so important, and making sure that you are defining it and your students or your other teachers or your administration, or if you're in a community choir and working with a board, a nonprofit board, or a church, and you're working with a pastor, and that all of these people are not defining you, that you are leaning in to define yourself.
And you can scratch those different itches that you may have, not necessarily by changing your career, but branching out and being involved in some of those things. One of my biggest worries once I made the transition from a teacher to a principal was I wasn't going to be able to have the day-to-day work. And I was able to scratch that itch with both of our kids by being an assistant or a head coach in terms of volunteering for them. Was I good at it? No, not really. But it was a way for me to have a chance to spend more time with my kids as they were growing up. If you want to scratch an itch that's a little bit different than what your job is, find ways where you might be able to volunteer to do some of those things to scratch that itch. That's a leadership development tool that's being used by lots of organizations around the country and around the world for their high performers. They can't put them in a different role, so they help them find pro bono or volunteer work that helps scratch the leadership piece that they're trying to develop.
Right. Right. How often, when you know of stories and instances like that you find people end up maybe discovering something new about themselves that they didn't know?
Oh, it happens all the time. You may find that you enjoy it and that you're good at it. And then the trifecta is, the magic three is, if people will pay you for it, that's a great thing. But 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So it's a music, and this is an obscure music reference. And you know this because I've got no sense of humor, but this is the old Meatloaf song. 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
No, I love it. It's so true. You mentioned
That's classical music, Beth, classical music.
But yeah. It's okay. It's all music. All music is all music. I think this, and I know that you're not a financial necessarily professor, but it is part of being a CEO. And I'm not asking you to, tell me the time value of money or anything like that. But I think that being you mentioned it, if someone will pay you for it. So oftentimes teachers, because we know we're not paid a lot, struggle to find that monetary value in what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So number one, you're worth a lot more than you think. We'll start there. All right. Number two, you've got to take a look at what other people are charging for similar kinds of stuff.
Right.
And then price yourself at the top half, or at the top third of the top quartile, top 25%. Because once you've built that credibility, both your professional skills as well as your technical skills, and you've demonstrated your expertise with that, people will find ways. All right. Now, the one area where I don't think this works as well is the idea of tutoring. Because if you're tutoring, you also have a personal relationship, and the vast majority of these people are trying to do the very best they can with very limited resources. And you combine this, and this is, late 2020, COVID and the pandemic, people are hurting. And so the things that you try to, this doesn't apply in something like that because you're doing it for a different reason. I'm trying to work through right now with one organization locally to be able to share some of my MBA content for free for small and medium-sized businesses in one of the most impoverished counties within the state of North Carolina. Because while I can't help them with access to financial capital, I can certainly give them access to intellectual capital. And we're trying to work through how some of that stuff is going to play out right now. More to come.
Isn't that the exciting thing about the internet?
Oh, yeah. Because, and this is where your professional skills tie in, because if they simply want the technical skills, they can YouTube, they can TED Talk, they can find it on Dr. Google.
Right.
But what sets you apart is your ability to translate what's out there into something actionable and usable and practical for other people. And that's how I've made part of what the pivot is with my wife's and my organization, where we focus on management and leadership education, on strategy, innovation, and leadership, because we translate the rigorous models and try to put them into place in a relevant and practical way where people can actually use them.
Right, right. Now, I love that you mentioned innovation, because I think this is very relevant. One of the units in your course was on innovation, and it was a thread of the entire course, the course called Creating Value. And we had to come up with as many different ideas to innovate something. And it's probably one of my most favorite activities that I've done. It was fascinating to do it with other people, but we also are seeing that kind of thing more than ever in today's world, right? In late October 2020.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just going to say, yes, Beth, that's absolutely the case. Now,
but you teach that, right? So we are having to do that out of necessity.
Innovation is a skill, okay? And so what I'll suggest to y'all, to the readers, is number one, and teachers are the very best at this, right? Learn what goes on in one sector and apply it to another. It's the concept of association. And there's a business school guy named Franz Johansson who wrote a very well-regarded book called The Medici Effect. And if he's got a series of TED Talks, so in 20 minutes, you can get the whole idea of the Medici effect. But the idea is, and it's the same thing that Peter Drucker did, who is one of my heroes. When Drucker was growing up, his family had get-togethers where people would come together from lots of different backgrounds and points of view and come together, and some great things happen. Now, Johansson talks about the Medici effect, and that's part of the reason that the Medicis back in Renaissance Italy were so powerful, is that they were able to pull together different ideas and different things that kind of tied together. Now, for those of y'all that don't have a background in it, I'll suggest that you Google two different terms. Term number one is an empathy map, 3 terms, okay? Because an empathy map means you take a person or a segment and you think through, what are their hopes and fears? What are their feelings? What do they see? What do they hear? What do they want? And what are they hearing other people talk about? A second big concept that's gets a lot of currency is the jobs to be done idea, which is 3 questions. When I do this, I want this so that I can have that. And if you look at, that comes from Dr. Clayton Christensen. And if he's the late Dr. Clayton Christensen, but if you Google the idea of jobs to be done, that's another very powerful way to start thinking about what goes on with innovation. And then the third big idea is this idea of a customer journey, from where they first become aware of what you do to coming through and doing what it is that they want to do with you, generally the job to be done. And then how do you, once they leave, how do you create an ambassador or a raving fan for what it is that you do? You can go a lot deeper into this whole idea with innovation. I don't profess to be an expert in innovation in any way, shape, or form. I am what I consider a pretty good generalist in terms of being able to look at things from lots of different perspectives and then being able to create and translate it into things that are actionable. That's a skill. Skills can be taught. And I'll suggest that my background as a teacher helped prepare me to be very observant, to pay attention and to look at those connections.
I love that. I appreciate so much the different frameworks that you've provided for us today, because so often when you are in sectors, you get the educational speech and you get the music speech and you get the K-5 speech and the middle school speech. And I think that we have so much to learn by what you just shared, finding those connections. And you gave us so many tools today to innovate within our classrooms, to innovate within our job searches, but ultimately to look within and find ways we can innovate, grow, think strategically as ourselves, as we really begin to understand what does it mean to be the CEO of your own life.
And one more thing, and you didn't mention this, but I'm not going to embarrass you by asking you to remember, but remember the 4F rule. Find a freaky friend far away. The idea that you can get those innovative ideas comes from talking with people outside of the people you usually talk with.
Yeah. This is an example. I'm not calling you freaky or anything like that, right? But like,
freaky means different.
Yep.
Okay. Find somebody who thinks differently, who has a different point of view. If all you do is focus on the people within your own circle, you have your own personal echo chamber.
Right. That's huge. So important. I have been guilty of that so often in my time as a choral conductor, and know that it exists in the business world. I think that's what gives me so much joy, is through these new connections here through the business school. So, Chris, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And folks out there in choir Baton land, thank you for what you do, because what y'all do, and I have no capability, zero in music. So if you look at those technical skills, I have zero there. I have no credibility. No one should trust me with anything with music. All right. No one. All right. But what y'all do is you help people have their own dreams and aspirations, because every family wants their children to be better than they are. And everybody walks in deep down wanting to be a little bit better than before. And the arts, I've seen it over and over again. And I'm not an arts background kind of guy, but I've seen over and over again where arts help students find their passion and grow their passion in different ways, not necessarily through being an artist in one way, shape, or form, but those skills and those models and those ways of looking at things are so incredibly powerful. So thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for the countless hours that you spend preparing lessons, preparing units, preparing annual plans, figuring out how to differentiate instruction in a large classroom in incredibly difficult circumstances. And your families pay that price as well, because you're doing this stuff generally after hours. You are underpaid. What I hope is I'm able to, in my conversation with you and with Beth, give you all some hope that there are lots of different things that you can do and apply them in your own work. Thanks for your time.